Hello everybody, my name is Matthew Kern and I want to welcome you to this crew resource management course that we're going to be going through. I'm going to tell you a little bit about it in this first section, and I'm also going to tell you a little bit about me. The name of the course is 12 Seconds Change Everything, and so we're going to talk about what that actually means. We're going to talk about crew resource management. I'm going to tell you what we'll do in the next few experiences and the syllabus that you will be participating in. So let's just move along. So this is a little bit about me. So you know who this is coming from. You know a little bit about my past, why I'm qualified to teach crew resource management. I'm a retired Marine Corps pilot. I flew the CH-46 Echo, the TH-57. I was an instructor in the TH-57. That's the Bell 206. So I taught flight students how to fly helicopters for the Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard. And then I was also board selected to fly the V-22 Osprey, which you see down there in the bottom right corner. While I was in the Marine Corps, I became a WTI. Basically, a WTI is a Marine Corps Top Gun, so I was an instructor there. And then a little bit about my other history is I helped plan and lead some of the initial missions in Afghanistan in 2001, 2002. So I actually went to Bahrain with two other people and sat in a room with General Mattis for about 5 days as we planned how we were going to go into Afghanistan in November 2001. And then we went and executed that mission. I was a TH-57 and V-22 model manager for crew resource management. So that's a little bit important since you're learning crew resource management from me. But I went on to the V-22 and helped design what was called the USMC Aviation Training Transformation Program. This is where we incorporated crew resource management into everything, not just into being a pilot. We did it into our maintenance program. There, we did it to our crew with our crew chiefs and just really everything, that was involved in aviation. Crew resource management plays a part. That's why it's not just an aviation thing, but it's also can be in any walk of life, any business. I've been a air medical pilot for Wake Forest Baptist Hospital. You can see it there in the top picture, but I did that flying the EC-130, EC-135, and then I was also a relief pilot, so I traveled all around the country doing that. Currently, what my day job is I'm a pilot for the Penske NASCAR team, and I fly this helicopter right here, but I go around and I fly basically at the races. So I hit the lottery with that job. It's just a wonderful job, wonderful company, wonderful people. So what are we going to talk about in this training course? We're going to talk about crew resource management. What is it? How does it apply to you and to your job? I'm going to give a lot of aviation examples, but I'm also, when I give those aviation examples, just understand that they tie into your job as well, whatever that job is. If you're a paramedic, if you're a flight nurse, if you're working in the emergency room or the emergency department, working in the ICU, it does not really matter. You can be working anywhere. Crew resource management, communication, and those things are so important. I do that by talking about focusing on the big three of crew resource management to me. That is decision making, communication, and situational awareness. We're going to define expertise. What is an expert? How do we become an expert? We're going to talk about the challenges of time-critical decision-making and what kind of environment that you might work in. How does team communications play into that? And why is debriefing so important and lessons learned? Talk about scenario-based training and lessons learned. And the last thing, we're going to tie that into a shared learning environment. So just to start this off, and I want to really set the stage of what crew resource management is and why this is so important to me. And I'm going to do this by talking about a night that changed everything in my life. And that's July 9, 2001. I was flying the CH-46 Echo. This is the helicopter there, and we were flying as a section. This particular night, the mission was to go out and do some practice shipboard landings. I was a night systems instructor. We had another night system instructor in the other aircraft and two night system instructor crew chiefs, and we were teaching a new pilot in each aircraft and new crew chief in each aircraft. So the crew makeup of both aircraft was 5 people: pilot, instructor, co-pilot, and then we had crew chief, and then student crew chief, and then an aero observer in there. So this particular night, we were going to do these night shipboard landings to practice so we could go out to the big ship following weeks because we were working up for our deployment. And we ended up departing a little bit late this night. It does play a little bit of a role. We departed late because of some thunderstorms. And when we did, we departed single ship, not as a section, and we went down to a practice shipboard landing area that we would work at. Here's a satellite footage of that practice shipboard landing area. And you can see the picture of it over there on the screen. And it's actually bigger than you would think. This is actually, Google Images. That is almost the length of a football field. It's actually pretty long. And so this is the New River in Jacksonville, North Carolina. So what we would do is we fly shipboard patterns there. And you can see when we're out at the ship in the Navy or the Marine Corps, we're flying at 300 feet, 80 knots. That's a standard shipboard pattern. So 300 feet, 80 knots is as low as we're at. When we come in here and we come around what's called the 90 position, a beam where we're landing, we start a descending, decelerating turn, and we want to be at the what's called the 90 position. This is the 180, descending, decelerating. We want to be at the 90 position at 200 feet, 60 knots. And then we want to be 100 feet, 50 knots coming in over the ship. So you can see the LHA deck is pretty realistic for us when we're practicing, because if you see where my arrow is right there, it has rocks. And so it actually is a ledge. So you kind of get the feeling that you're coming over a ship's deck edge and you're coming in to land. All right, so we're doing this at night, and we're doing this on night vision goggles. So if you're not familiar with what night vision goggles look like, and this might be if flying air medical, we fly night vision goggles. But also when we just fly in the military, when we're flying at night, we use night vision goggles the majority of the time. This is kind of what it looks like. So if you're a gamer and you play Call of Duty or something like that, you'll see the same thing if you use night vision goggles. But this is what we see outside of the helicopter when we're flying at night. Basically, the way goggles works is it works off ambient light, and it basically turns day into night for us. It's still a little tough to see and to break things out, but the point is we can see, and we can see lights. And so when we're coming into landing in LZs, flying air medical, this is what we're normally looking through, and we see the lights of the trucks and the vehicles and all that. Okay, so that's what it looks like coming in. And I want to show you the cockpit of the CH-46 Echo, and I want to tell you a little bit about what went on that night. So my aircraft, we had an aircraft issue, and we were sitting at the front of the LHA deck, and we were talking, so we weren't actually landing in the pattern at the time. So the other aircraft was. So I asked the gunnery sergeant that was in the back, I said, "Hey, Gunny, where are they?" And he said, "Well, sir, they're on downwind," and he told me where they were. Inside the helicopter, we continued our conversation talking about what we were going through inside of our helicopter. We had turned off what was called the power management system, and we were flying without it. And so we were just talking about how you had to fly with the power management system off. A couple of seconds later, I asked the gunny, I said, "Hey, Gunny, can I lift?" And he said, "Sir, they're not here anymore. Did they call departing?" And I was like, "No, they didn't call departing." And we had a new sergeant inside the helicopter that night with me, and his name was Sergeant Salah. And he said, "What do you mean, gunny aircraft don't just disappear?" He stuck his head outside of the helicopter and he said, "Sir, there are rocks in this water." And I was like, "No." And he said, "Come up now." So let me explain what happened with that other helicopter. So when we come around and we're landing at night and we hit that 180, so that a beam place of where we're going to land, we call for what was called smacks off. So we called for the anti-collision lights off. So you can see where my circle is right there. You see the long straw that's attached there. This is the anti-collision lights, okay? And you see this right in front of it. This is another switch, and that's what we're going to be talking about, is that switch right in front. So you have two pilots up front. You have the person in the left seat and you have the person in the right seat. Well, this particular night, the guy that was on the controls was in the left seat. The gentleman that was in the right seat wasn't. He was a little bit shorter, so he would take his knee board off to turn off the anti-collision lights. Now, why would we do that? When you're going into the ship and you're out in the middle of the ocean, those smacks, those are the lights that flash. they can blind the people that on the ship. Also, what can happen is the light can hit off the ship and bounce back at you and then hit your goggles. Okay, so he would reach over with his kneeboard and he would turn that anti-collision light off right there. And so he had done it thousands of times, just something that he was normally used to doing. Well, what ended up happening this particular night is that his kneeboard came forward, hit the anti-collision lights off, but it also hit this switch right in front. What happened then is it turned on a red cockpit dome light inside the helicopter, and this is what happened. The goggles were basically bloomed out. You couldn't see outside of the helicopter. So the bright light that was introduced basically shut the goggles down, or made it so you could not see outside of the helicopter. But does that mean that the helicopter can't fly? No, the helicopter's still flying. Everything is still operational. You can still look right down in front of you and you can see all your instruments. You know, I tell people when we fly goggles or we fly instruments in the Marine Corps, 80% of the time you're flying instruments. You're referencing and looking outside of with your goggles. So they were still flying, but what ended up happening is everybody focused on getting the lights turned off. Okay, so that's what ended up happening. Everybody was focused on getting the lights off. All right, so what can you do when the cockpit chaos ensues or the situation rapidly changes? Well, you know, we train for this stuff, and in this case, you know, what they could have done is they could have leveled their wings, centered their ball, you know, pulled power. This is what we brief, you know, this is what we're going to do. But unfortunately, everybody focused on turning the light off. Nobody focused and basically stopped flying the aircraft. And when you're low and slow like you are, like I explained to you before, it doesn't take much time. They estimate that the time of when the light turned on to the time they were in the water was 12 seconds. So they flew, unfortunately, the helicopter straight in the water. So when I asked the sergeant and the gunny if I could lift, and he said, there are rocks in this water? When I lifted up, there was debris all the way up to the edge of the edge of where the rocks are. And so we lifted and we came around and the aircraft was right there. It was in the water. So we flew around for a minute looking for survivors. We saw one helmet pop up, then we saw another helmet pop up. We dropped a raft in there to them. We couldn't figure out how to get them out. You know, I was the senior guy on the aircraft that night. The gunny and the sergeant said, "Sir, pull into a hover." I wouldn't do that because, you know, one, I don't know how shallow the water is, which you can see it's very shallow, and I'll show you a picture here in just a second that kind of shows that a little bit more. But it was very shallow, so I wasn't going to pull into a hover and let them jump out. So what we ended up doing is we landed back over here, and that's a whole nother class within itself. Excuse me, I keep going back to that slide. But we landed back on the LHA deck, and when we did that, the gunny went into the water. So I told you earlier there was 5 people inside of that helicopter, and we had seen 2. So a few minutes later, the SAR, the search and rescue helicopter, got there. When they did, their diver went down and he came back up and he came over to our and landed on the LHA deck and talked to my crew chief. My crew chief said, "Sir, take me home. They're all dead. Take me home." So we had 2 survivors and we had 3 people that had not survived. So when I'm teaching a class live, I like to ask the question, you know, who survived and who did it. And obviously we can't do that, you know, on a video. But what ended up happening was the 2 pilots survived and the 3 crew chiefs in the back did not. That doesn't make it, you know, everybody's at fault in this. I mean, everybody focused on getting the light off and they didn't fly the helicopter. And unfortunately, 3 good people did not make it that night. 3 good people lost their lives. So here's a picture of from the next day. You can kind of see it's a little blurry because I blew it up. But this is what this is the back end of the helicopter here. And you can see the engines are right here. This is where the wheels would be. And they flew it straight into water. And this night changed my whole life. It really did. And let me explain why. We lost 3 good Marines that night, but what I lost was Sergeant Clark Beatty. Let me explain a little bit about Clark. When I got to my squadron and I got out of my car to go check into my squadron, there was a Lance Corporal that got out of his car to walk in at the same time, and it was Clark. So we walked in together. I went to see the XO within my squadron. He went to see the Sergeant Major. But Clark and I were assigned to each other. He was my combat crew chief. I did everything with him. I did a lot of flights with him. Almost all of my flights were with him. I saw him right before we went flying that night, and I was like, bro, why aren't we flying together? And he's like, hey man, we're not flying together tonight, but we're on the schedule together the next night. Well, the next night didn't come, and unfortunately he did not make it, and as well as Sergeant Lane and Lance Corporal Hughes. And these were good people, and they didn't set out that night to make a mistake. They didn't set out to crash the helicopter, but unfortunately they did. And in the world that we live in, it's so important that we learn how to communicate, we learn how to talk, we learn how to do everything that we need to do to avoid nights like this, because this man was a stellar Marine, and everybody looked up to him. Every July 9th, it starts in the morning and goes all night while we're talking about Clark Beatty, because he was such a good person and impacted so many lives. So, not to start this course off on such a sour note and to talk about, the loss of 3 Marines. However, the point is it was human error. They didn't mean for it to happen, but it did happen. We don't set out to make mistakes. We're going to talk a lot about this as the course goes on. But we learned so much from this, and the hard part that really hit me on this is that I found out within a couple of days that another helicopter in another squadron had a mishap where they had turned on their red cockpit dome light. And when they turned on that red cockpit dome light, they had a hard landing. So nobody died. They kind of pranged up the helicopter. But the problem is they didn't share that story so other people could learn from it. And we have a tendency to do that in aviation. We have a tendency to do that in a lot of jobs, but we don't share the story so other people can learn from the mistakes that might have been made. The fix on that helicopter was a 6-cent fix. It was to turn that switch into a dual toggle switch instead of a single toggle switch, meaning when they hit the switch and it turned on, you had to pull it to turn it back off. So they were having trouble getting it back off, and 12 seconds is not a long time to get it off. If it was a dual toggle switch, the switch would have never turned on. So that red cockpit dome light would have never turned on. And so that's what's heartbreaking about it. So we're going to talk a lot about a lot of these stories, but this guy right here, Sergeant Clark Beatty, was a huge impact on my life, a huge impact on a lot of Marines' lives, and it's just a shame that he's not here to still teach people and still work with people. All right, so we're going to talk about this. I hope you jump into the syllabus after this. This is the introduction to it, introduction experience to it. But take this introduction experience and then go over and jump into the syllabus, and I'm going to break these concepts down into very short classes. This will be probably the longest that I go over, just to set the background of what crew resource management is. We don't want to go out and make mistakes. And we want to learn how to communicate and work together. All right, thanks for watching this. Take the rest of the experience, and I look forward to seeing you in the rest of the course.